Makati Productions present an original Star Wars story, Legacy's Edge, Completion, written by Gregory O. Scott. Chapter 1. The Cavern Tavern was aptly named. Its low ceilings and uneven walls were made from rough-carved rock. Dangling lanterns lit halos into clouds of cigarette smoke over tables occupied by a blur of patrons, humans and non-humans, all sharing the rough look of fringers who only wanted to make credits and be left alone. This was the sort of place where you could pull a blaster, blow away the guy next to you, and everybody would pretend it didn't happen. At least, that was how it seemed to Aden Tohri. He just wasn't sure if the Force was telling him all that, or his raw nerves. Not every place on Rampak 567 seemed so, well, subterranean, even though the entire port had been carved into the entrails of an airless asteroid. He passed plenty less ominous places on the way here, but they weren't his destination. This was. The Force was telling Aden. He thought so anyway. As he lingered in the cantina's arching entryway, wrapped in his hooded robes, the figure beside him leaned close and asked, "Are you certain?" Shakily, Aden nodded. He felt he should have been asking her that. After all, Ohali Soroc was a veteran Jedi and his teacher. He was only an apprentice, barely 16 years old, but he had a gift, or so he was told. Master Solo Fel called his talent wayfinding. When he sought something, when he really deeply concentrated on it, the Force told him where to find it. This wasn't the boon it sounded like. The Force only helped him find physical things and places, and only once he knew specifically what he was looking for. He had to concentrate deeply to make sure he was pointed in the right direction, which felt especially difficult when poised outside a seedy cantina on a desolate port drifting through wild space. But it was still a gift, and it was the reason he'd been reassigned from the Jedi Academy on Bastion and sent to Ohali's side. Ohali was seeking something very special, and she'd been doing it for almost a quarter century. Aden couldn't grasp that amount of time, and he couldn't believe he could ever play a role in his teacher's quest. But he had to try. "Can you tell me where he is?" Ohali asked. Aden scowled beneath his hood and looked across the cantina. He saw a group of Loud, a brace of Aqualish at one table, another table of Twi'leks and Thelans, a couple human spacers at the bar. One booth had two insectoids, and it looked they might have been, well, getting intimate, or maybe it was how their kind said hello. None of them had what he wanted. The Force was nudging Aden, telling him their quarry was close. At least, he was pretty sure it was the Force, and he looked and looked until he felt his attention pulled to one booth in the far corner. Its occupant was a Zahethra with messy gray whiskers spilling off the side of each jaw. His only companions were the 4 bottles sitting on the table, one of which had tipped over and spilled some sudsy brew. Aden swallowed and said, "I think he's the Zahethra in the back booth." "And why do you think that?" asked Ohali. He shrugged nervously. "It just seems right." "You believe the Force is telling you?" "I think so." "Ah," said Ohali. "Well, I believe you're correct." He glanced at her hooded face. "The Force. We were told to look for one called Finter. This is a fairly common name on Zath." Aden blinked. "I didn't know that. Why didn't you tell me?" Her thin lips flexed a tiny smile. "I was testing you, of course. And besides, that was no guarantee. In my travels I met 2 humans and a Vor called Ohali, and a Koran called Soroc. The galaxy holds an infinity of unlikely things. Including, perhaps, what she'd been looking for since before Aden was born." He looked back at the booth. "What should we do?" "Just go up and talk to him." "I'll make a stop on the way. Please keep that hood on and follow me, young apprentice." Aden scowled and shadowed Ohali as she went over to the bar counter and pulled off her hood, revealing the blue-skinned, orange-eyed face of a middle-aged Duros. Ohali purchased 2 beverages, took one in each hand, then walked over to the booth. Aden guessed that second drink was for Finter, given that he wasn't of legal age. Not that anybody in the Cavern Tavern would care. The big, shaggy Zahethra was seated in the center of the booth. Ohali slid in on his right and gestured for Aden to sit on his left. He did so and pulled back his hood. Finter's small eyes flicked between them and his lips curled to reveal a set of impressive canines, but he didn't tell them to leave. Those eyes settled on the second drink, which Ohali pushed into the middle of the table, just out of the Finter's reach. "Who are you?" the Zahethra said, slightly slurring. "We're travelers," Ohali said cheerily, "looking to enjoy ourselves before we decide on our next destination." Finter's right ear twitched. "Aren't many places to go from the Rampack system, unless you want to try skipping past the rim." "Extragalactic studies are of interest to me," Ohali said. "In fact, I enjoy curiosities of all kinds. I've wandered the stars for many years, investigating unlikely things." It wasn't a lie. Finter looked at her, then at Aden, and asked, "Who's this one?" "Your son." He laughed at his own joke. A blue Duros and a brown human were an unlikely family. "But," Ohali said smoothly, "you could call him my ward. I've been taking care of him for some friends. He shares my interest in the galaxy's inexplicable treasures." Aden nodded and tried to smile, but in truth he'd rather be back on Bastion. Master Solo Fell was a bit of a hard case, but at least there he'd be able to train with other students his own age. "Inexplicable things," Finter echoed and looked into the half-drunk glass in front of him. "All right, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen?" "Well, I'd have to think about that." Ohali cocked her head. "I suppose it must be the Chaloon Rift. There was a truly mystifying fissure in spacetime centered around a massive alien object, a monolith if you will, that contained great amounts of inexplicable energy." Aden knew the story. She hadn't exactly bragged about her adventure with the legendary Luke Skywalker, but you could tell she was proud of it. "Chaloon Rift. Never heard of it," Finter said, then swallowed big gulps from his glass. Ohali took a tiny sip from hers. "I'm afraid it's been locked down by the Alliance for decades. Too dangerous to let civilians near." "Civilians?" Finter chuckled dryly. "You got to watch out for them, always sticking snouts in places they don't belong. Dangerous places." "And what dangerous places might you have seen?" Ohali asked. Finter sneered again, baring canines. He looked between the Jedi and asked, "All right, who told you? Who sent you my way? Was it Galagoth?" "I'm afraid I don't know any Galagoth." "Well, then who was it? Who's been spreading rumors about me?" "Oh, I just heard a few things from a friend of mine in another cantina," she said. Which was technically true, although that cantina had been in another star system 2 sectors away, and that friend had been one of the endless contacts Ohali had made through the years who passed her hints and rumors. This hearsay was more tantalizing than most, which was why she and Aden had hurried to Rampack 567 just to find this angry, drunken Zahethra who'd been wandering the port's drinking establishments for at least a week. No, Aden corrected himself, not angry. At least, Finter wasn't angry with the strangers at his table. He had something worse bothering him. Finter sighed, finished off his glass, and pushed it aside. The thing would have slid off the table, but Aden shot a hand out to catch it. Finter reached over his other discarded glasses for the drink Ohali had brought. She raised a hand to block him. "Please," she said, "we are curious as to what you've seen." Finter's fur bristled. "I should have kept my snout shut. I should have kept it all to myself." "Why didn't you?" Ohali asked, surprisingly blunt. Finter blinked. "I guess, maybe I thought if I told it to other people, it would seem more real. But they all kept telling me I was crazy." "I don't think you're crazy," Ohali said seriously. "Please, Finter, tell me the story." He stared at the remaining glass. "I want that," he said, "after you're through with your tale." Finter snarled, then let his hand drop in surrender. "You want to know what I saw? Well, tough, because I don't know what I saw." "What happened?" Ohali said, insistent. "I was skipping around the Pethax system because, well, I didn't want to get seen. I was about 7 light years rimward of the place when my hyperdrive started having problems. Kept dropping out of the lightspeed just as soon as I went in. I was skipping along, thinking it'd take me forever to get to a safe system, when suddenly this thing appears in front of me. It wasn't a planet. It wasn't natural. But it wasn't a ship either. It looked like 2 four-sided pyramids stuck together on the white ends. So it was like an 8-sided diamond, but it was gigantic. Sensors couldn't tell me what it made of or how big it really was. I thought it might have been one of those weird super weapons the Emperor left behind, except the Empire was never really out this far. Nobody was out this far. Did you get close to it? Asked Ohali. Sensors didn't pick up any energy coming from the thing. No heat. I thought it was dead in space, so I decided to try creeping closer, maybe see if I could land on the hull or take some surface samples. He grunted. Thought that diamond might have been worth something. What happened when you got close? I don't know. That's when everything stopped making sense. There was this light. And then I was on the ground. I was home on Zeth. Aden frowned. How do you know it was Zeth? I knew the smell on the air. The grass. It's the world I was born and raised on. Kid, Finter said. I should have never left. Stang it. He reached across the table for the remaining drink, but Ohali blocked him again. Tell me, she said, what happened next? He ran claws through his messy fur. This is the part where everybody thinks I'm carking mad. I saw my mother. She's been dead 20 years. You understand? But she was there, and I was there, and I was just a pup again. And it was lovely. But then my father showed up. My father was not a good barf. He's been dead almost as long, but he was there too, and he attacked us like he used to. And even though I was just a pup, I was strong enough to fight him, somehow. He trailed off. Ohali leaned forward. What happened then? Her voice was as intent as Aden had ever heard it. I don't know. I started thinking how weird it all was, how impossible, and then there was this bright light, I think. A real bright light, and then it ended. Why did that happen? Do you remember what triggered it? I don't know. Finter pounded the table, almost knocking over another glass. I don't even remember it clear anymore. Something in Aden's expression raised his hackles. He snarled again. This wasn't a dream or delusion. It happened. He raised his neck and ran a paw across the short dark fur there, revealing what looked like the slash of claw marks. That's how I got these scars. From my father, who's been dead for 20 years. He was there. I was there. It was all real. How did this experience end? Asked Ohali. Like it began, Finter sighed. I got a sense that those things who looked like my parents, that they were disappointed. That I wasn't what they wanted. Then there was this flash of light, and I was back in my ship. The chrono said I'd been gone for a couple minutes, but I swear I'd been down there for days. He swallowed. It was like I'd never left. But I did. It happened. We understand, said Ohali. But Finter glared at her. You think I'm crazy, don't you? That I've got a few stem bolts loose. He showed the claw marks on his neck again. I know what they're saying about me, but I didn't give myself these scars. It was my dead father. I understand. And I want to know, does your ship's computer have a log of this encounter? Aden, who suspected Finter did have some stem bolts loose, expected another angry, futile outburst. But the Sahethra curled his paw into a fist and said, I've got him. The coordinates for all those weird jumps, the thing I found. It's all in my computer. I just want to be clear, Ohali said. Was this object still there when you woke from your experience? He nodded. It was there when I jumped away. 9 days ago. Ohali clasped her long blue fingers together. Mr. Finter, I would like a copy of your ship's navigational data. Naturally, I'm willing to work out a price. Then we'll negotiate. Finter pointed to the waiting glass. But first, I want my down payment. Aden barely spoke a word in the ensuing hours. Ohali's apprentice was given to taciturn periods. In part, she knew, because he still missed the Bastion Academy, but he remained silent even after they completed negotiations, followed Finter back to his ship, purchased a copy of his computer data, and taken it back to their own ship for upload and parsing. It was only after she started reviewing the information in the cockpit that Aden asked, out of nowhere, Do you really think this is it? Ohali looked at him from the pilot's chair. I believe this is the most solid lead I've had in years, and is well worth investigating. But still, Finter didn't seem sober, reliable. Ohali smirked. Perhaps not, but his data was sound, and I think he believed what he said. Didn't you feel that honesty in the Force? I don't know. Aden got up from the co-pilot's chair and stood anxiously in the cockpit, rocking on his feet. The Force helps me find things. It puts up signs for me, and I try to follow them. I've never been that good at reading people. Nor I was early on. But I've learned. You have more experience than I do. Exactly my point. She tapped her computer screen. We should head out and investigate once we have all the supplies we'll need. But do you really think this thing he found is, well, you can't say it. Mortis Aden exhaled. After all this time, one of them finally got it out. I don't know, Ohali said simply. From his vague description, it sounds possible. Of course, even if it is some ancient object, there's no guarantee it's Mortis. She found that out the hard way 20-some years ago in the Chaloon Rift. But we must investigate. I know, Aden said, and wavered on his feet again. There were times when she could see the strong, self-assured Jedi Knight her apprentice would become. Unfortunately, this wasn't one of them. He was acting like the confused, dissatisfied teenager he currently was. Ohali asked, Aden, do you want to find the Mortis Monolith? The question took him by surprise. His eyelids fluttered. He looked away and admitted, I'm not sure. When was the last time anybody was in that thing? A century ago. If half of what those stories we've heard is true, well, there's no telling what we get there. It could be really dangerous. It could, Ohali agreed. Aden, still edgy, turned the question back on her. Do you want to find Mortis? I've dedicated my life to it, Ohali said seriously. 25 years ago she'd set out with 9 other quest knights appointed by Luke Skywalker himself. They scattered across the galaxy to track down the Mortis Monolith and the Force-imbued dagger which, Skywalker believed, would allow them to destroy the indestructible monstrosity known as Abeloth. In the beginning she'd never thought she'd actually find it. She'd hoped, of course, but also braced herself for a lifetime of fruitless seeking while telling herself it was necessary. She'd not been affected by Abeloth's eldritch powers, thankfully, but watching her distort the minds of peers like Yakio Savitu and Valen Horn had sickened her stomach and torn at her heart. She remembered sitting with her close friend Nachua Wan as the falling woman slowly recovered. She remembered how Nachua had shuddered and remembered pain of Abeloth's violation, remembered, also mourning her friend after Nachua had died soon after battling the Sith. So much young promise cruelly taken away. The early encounter in the Chaloon Rift had raised her hopes, then crashed them. 20 long years later, it remained Ohali's closest taste of the Force's most raw power. The Chaloon object had been horrifying and unreal, Mortis might be worse. Still, she wanted to find it with every speck of her being. Of the original 10 quest knights, 2 had been tragically lost and 3 had been reassigned. The remaining 5 were getting older now. Most, like Ohali, had been assigned apprentices who'd carry on the quest for generations if necessary. But there might be a chance to end it all, right here, right now. Aden crossed his arms and looked at the deck. I know we have to look into this. I just don't think we should do it alone. Can't we contact Asus? Before we go, I'll be sending a summary directly to Grand Master Skywalker, Ohali said, but Asus is over a week away. I don't want to wait this long for reinforcements. There's no telling how long Mortis might linger outside the Pithak system, or even if it's still there. Are there any other Jedi nearby? I sent out a signal as soon as we got back. If there's any Jedi within 3 sectors, they should hear it and come to help. Are there any Jedi within 3 sectors? Don't worry, apprentice. She laid a hand on the ship's console. I think the Force will provide. We're all going to die. Somebody shouted as screams rippled through the crowd. Which, Orenko thought, was really not helping. He raised his arms and called for calm, only to find himself caught in a stampede of people running for shelter. It wasn't much of a stampede, thankfully. Orderlies were slow, squat, soft-bodied creatures and the tallest barely scraped Orenko's ribcage. Unfortunately, those were also traits that made them vulnerable to predators. He heard another monstrous wail from the forest at the edge of the village. Wind blew hard beneath a steely sky, shaking treetops and making it difficult to tell where the creatures were coming from. Orenko tried to reach out with the Force and sense them, even as frightened orderlies kept jostling him around the waist. He didn't feel the predators in the woods, but he did feel his master close by. Orenko turned and saw the comparatively tall shape of a human trying to push against the orderly stream. By now the villagers were packing into with huts and ferrocrete buildings, and the lanes between were starting to thin. It took less than a minute for Valen Horn to reach his student. Master Horn had his lightsaber in hand but not ignited. Orenko's rested with the bandolier across his chest. He reached one long clawed hand to steady the weapon over his hearts. "Well, where are they?" the human asked, looking around at the shaking tree line. Orenko exhaled and tried to reach out again. He normally had an empathic talent, a special skill for sensing and influencing the minds of non-sentient creatures. Maybe that was a bit of his heritage coming through. On untamed Thosa, native Drethas proved their strength by tracking and slaying wild beasts. Unfortunately, they often turned their predatory instincts on each other. Orenko was glad to have left his war-racked homeworld behind for the galaxy offered by the Jedi, but right now he could use a little of his ancestors' talent. It was part of the reason why he'd been dispatched on this mission in the first place. Now he was going to find out if his force skills were as useful as he'd hoped. He reached out, sensed for the village's attackers, and sensed them. He stabbed a claw-tipped hand to his right and said, "One will come from there. The other one's approaching from directly ahead." "I'll take the one on the right." Valen squeezed his lightsaber, extending the long blue blade. "You take the other one." Orenko nodded. "Master, how should I stop it?" Valen understood his meaning. "However you can," he said. It was, really, the only answer. Valen sprinted to the right, through the narrow lanes that had finally cleared of frantic orderlies. By now all the little pachyderms had crowded into shelter, leaving the two Jedi to face the monsters alone. No, not monsters, he reminded himself. Decades ago this forested, barely populated planet had hosted a wealthy smuggler's nest. This smuggler had been a collector of exotic fauna, and had imported, among other things, a dozen Nexu pups. Apparently those creatures were rather cute when infants, in a rat-railed, six-eyed, spiny sort of way, but the pups had grown up into big, lethal predators who reproduced and made even more Nexu, and by now there were supposed to be several hundred of them running amok, wrecking the natural ecosystem and preying on the planet's few populated settlements, which happened to include this village of mostly helpless orderlies. Did these Nexus sense in any way that they'd been stranded far from home? Or were they just mindlessly driven by carnivorous hunger? Well, he supposed he was about to find out. Orenko took his lightsaber in hand but didn't ignite it. Savage wind blew in his face and racked the trees. He heard a fierce growl, felt the bleak intent of a predator, and then, finally, he saw the Nexu emerge from the forest. He froze, hearts pounding fast. He'd seen these creatures in zoos before but never been so dangerously close to one. The Nexu emerging from the woods strode toward him on claw-tipped paws. Its pale fur bristled, and the long spines on his back stood on end. Its long thick tail swayed behind it and his eyes were all focused entirely on Orenko. He clasped his lightsaber but didn't turn it on, not yet. Through the force he gained a small sense of the creature coming toward him. He felt his hunger but also his trepidation. The Nexu knew it was walking into an unfamiliar area where threats might lie. As it drew close to Orenko it slowed, becoming almost tentative. "Go back," Orenko told the deadly creature. "You do not belong here. The forest is full of food. You will find what you see there. Leave these villagers alone." The Nexu stopped before him. Was his touch working? Orenko wasn't sure. He tried, desperately, to tell the creature to go away, to go and never come back, to never bother these villagers again. The Nexu's tail twisted faster, a sign of anxiety. Go back," he urged. "The forest is full of food, the forest is a feast, go back, and never ever come again." The Nexu pawed the earth. For a moment it seemed like it would turn, and go the way it had come. Then came the whir of a lightsaber in motion, and the wail of the other Nexu. The creature before Orenko burst to run. It stampeded past him, and he was barely able to move out of the way. Rather than attack him, the Nexu hurried through the village streets, chasing the continued wails, and lightsaber sounds. Oren co-steadied himself, then sprinted after it. He got there just in time to see Valen Horn roll out from beneath the belly of the second Nexu and rise to his feet. That creature howled, and Oren Co could see the black slash marks of lightsaber cuts through his stomach. As Valen jumped back, the Nexu collapsed, crying its awful cry, tail thrashing madly. The first Nexu added his own cries, not of pain, Oren Co sensed, but of grief. Was the other animal a mate? A child? A friend? He didn't know, but he was certain he felt the keen of mourning. He felt anger too. The first Nexu leaped protectively atop the dying body of his friend, then slashed out with his paws. Oren Co reacted quickly and shoved Valen out of harm's way. The human fell but pushed himself upright, spun, and pointed his glowing blade at the angry beast. The dying Nexu thrashed once more, then went still. His partner seemed to sense this. It released another mournful wail, then stalked again toward Valen, needle-filled mouth open. Oren Co saw an opening on the creature's flank, but he held back. Instead of attacking, he spoke into the Nexu's mind again, saying, "Your loved one is gone. Save yourself. This place is death. Never come back. Go and run and feast somewhere else, but never come here. This place is death. You've seen it? This place is death." He could feel the Nexu's anger and also his fear. He amplified that fear, fed it, made it everything. Finally, the Nexu turned from Valen and ran all the way to the tree line, then disappeared inside the still churning forest. Valen didn't shut down his lightsaber. He walked cautiously over to the slain Nexu and prodded it with a foot to make sure it was dead. Then he scoured the trees again. Finally, he asked Oren Co, "Is it gone?" "It's gone," the Drethus nodded. "I don't think it will come back." "How can you tell?" Oren Co blinked. "I felt it, Master." Another Master might have been pressed for more or been openly skeptical. But Valen simply nodded and shut off his lightsaber. "That was well done," he said. "I wished I could have done more." He looked at the dead Nexu. It was a huge creature, and almost every inch of it was deadly. Tail, claws, spines, teeth like needles. Still, he thought, it needn't have died here. Valen put a hand on his shoulder. "Your empathy does you credit, but there are hundreds of villagers here. Their lives matter even more." Oren Co nodded grimly. Orderlies were starting to peek out of their doors. Soon the little blue pachyderms were flooding the streets, making noises of relief. They swarmed the Jedi, crowding them waist-high, thanking them for saving the village. Oren Co had to admit it did help his mood. Amidst the commotion, he barely noticed Valen reach into his tunic and pull out his comlink. He held the thing to his ear to listen to something. Oren Co had no idea what. When he was done, he pushed through the crowd until he reached his apprentice, took the Drethus by the arm, and said, "We need to get back to the ship. Something important has come up." Though the chattering orderlies nearly drowned out his words, Oren Co could feel icy dread from his teacher. "Something bad?" he asked. "Something important," Valen repeated. "The most important thing we'll ever do." Seen through transparent steel against a backdrop of immense black barely sprinkled with stars, for such was the view at Galaxy's edge, the object defied the mind's grappling attempts to understand. That double pyramid shape, that colossal diamond, was made of a metal-smooth substance, black but with a faint reddish sheen. There were no seams in this object, no ports of entry, not even hints as to how it had been constructed. It simply was, as though dropped into the universe whole, or perhaps it had existed since the universe began. Mortis didn't just seem like an aberration in time and space, it was one, and worse, an aberration in the Force. When he stared at the thing, Valen Horn, Jedi Master, wanted nothing more than to grab the controls and flee into hyperspace. With great effort, he restrained himself and looked at the Jedi around him. They'd rendezvoused with Ohali Soroc and her apprentice at this location, then coupled airlocks and gathered everyone in the cockpit of Valen's larger shuttle. They'd yet to discuss what to do next. Everyone was staring out the viewport, taking in Mortis. Finally, Ohali said, "The smuggler who stumbled on this place said he was taken by a bright light as soon as he came near. If we do the same thing, it should happen to us also. And then what? Aden said. Valen didn't know Ohali's Padawan, but the young man was obviously on edge. He hugged himself tight and his voice trembled slightly. Finter said he was met by things that spoke to him with the faces of his parents. What does that mean? Valen looked at Ohali. Master Skywalker said the ones were killed. Does this mean there's something else in there now? I don't know, the Duro shook her head. When we investigate, we must observe everything and trust nothing. Ohali wasn't wavering. As a quest knight, she'd been hunting for Mortis for most of her life. She wanted to go there and explore without hesitation. She wanted to complete her quest. She looked out the viewport at that unreal object and said, I didn't think this day would come. But it has, and we can't flinch from it. We think it has, Valen said. This could be some other weird object, like the one you found in the Chaloon Rift. No. She wagged her head. This is Mortis. I'm certain. Do you feel it? Yes, she said with certainty. He knew some people, like his wife and son, got skeptical when Jedi talked with that vague, mystical conviction, but as a Jedi himself he trusted it. He trusted Ohali, and he trusted his own feelings, which agreed with hers. This was Mortis. Another shiver of fear ran through him. He said, Ohali, can we talk in private? She nodded. They left their apprentices in the cockpit. Before the door closed on the rear cabin, he saw Aden giving Orenco a careful look over. Odds were, he was seeing his first ever Drethys. But once the door sealed, and they were alone in the windowless cabin, Valen focused on Ohali. He said, I'm reluctant to bring either of the Padawans to Mortis, if we're not ready for what's there. I understand, Ohali nodded. Aden is a promising student, but I don't believe he's ready to face whatever lays in Mortis. She tilted her head. Do you think Orenco is also unready? It's hard to say when we don't know what he should be ready for, Valen said. You know Orenco is older than either of us, don't you? I'm aware his people live long lives. Well, he's over a century old. Valen chuckled dryly. It was still hard to wrap his head around. That's pretty young for Drethys. He left his homeworld only 20-odd years ago. He's been my apprentice for the past decade. Sometimes I feel like he's the one who's old and wise, and in a way, he really is. Do you think he's ready to be a full knight? No. He still has things to learn, so I'd prefer he not go to Mortis. He didn't tell her his main reason, fear. He was afraid for Orenco's sake and, in a selfish way, for his own. Over the past 10 years, the wise, naive Drethys had become like a son to him. His own child had been born without any connection to the Force. Valen loved Stefan, but there were things father and son could never share, and it had pained him to realize he'd never have the same kind of bond with Stefan as he'd had with his own father. He could share that bond with his apprentice, and had. More, Orenco was a gift to posterity. As a Drethys, he had centuries of life ahead of him, centuries of wisdom to gain and impart. Even long-lived Kakruk, Tirasa, and Lobaka wouldn't match the experience his longevity allowed. Valen didn't want to risk that future, not for Orenco's sake, his own sake, or the sake of Jedi centuries from now. Maybe Ohali understood that. She said, we can leave both of them here with my ship. We'll take yours and go to Mortis together. Now they were at the other hurdle. Valen planted hands on his hips and admitted, I have one other concern. I'm not backing out of this, but there is something I'm worried about. What is it? He sucked in breath and exhaled a curse. Abeloth. There used to be a son here who embodied the dark side, and a daughter who embodied the light. There was a father who kept balance, and then there was Abeloth. According to the stories they'd been told, the dreaded Force entity had been mortal once. In trying to become a Force wielder alongside the father, she'd become immortal, yet twisted and evil. Are you afraid we'll find Abeloth inside? Ohali asked. It's possible. If not Abeloth, then some shade, some echo of her might be there. And Ohali, I'm not sure if I can handle that. His throat burned. He swallowed hard. Specks of water gathered in his eyes. They were tears of fear and shame. 25 years ago, he'd been one of the first souls Abeloth claimed. Though he'd not felt her touch since Luke Skywalker bested her in the place beyond shadows, nightmares had haunted him for years. Even now, when he closed his eyes, he was chilled to remember what she'd done to him. The worst part was that he hadn't even realized he was under her control. A switch had been flipped and his world was inverted. People he'd loved became insidious imposters. He'd attacked his own parents. Everyone except his sister Gisela, also under Abeloth's sway, became an enemy. Abeloth hadn't erased his memories or overridden his old self. She'd merely taken the man he was and made him dance, a puppet on strings without even knowing it. It was the most helpless he'd ever been. Ohali squeezed his arm. "We'll go down together. I'll stay with you and make certain you don't go astray." She'd never been touched by Abeloth. She'd never understand what it meant to be so powerless. You can't reason with someone when she's in their mind, Ohali. If something happens to me, if I start acting like you're an enemy or an imposter, Ohali, you'll have to kill me. Valen. He broke from her grip, then grabbed both her shoulders. His grip was so intense she squirmed in pain, but he didn't relent. Staring into her big orange eyes, he pleaded, "You have to do it, Ohali. You can't hesitate. You have to be ready." Her stiff Duro's face squirmed in discomfort. Ohali said, "If you're that worried, perhaps you should stay here. I can't let you go down alone either. Then maybe we should wait for more Jedi. They're still days away, and there's no telling how long that thing is going to be here." According to the records, the last place Mortis showed up was on the opposite end of the galaxy. It's got to be able to shift through hyperspace or other dimensions to travel. We don't know if we can stop it, but we can't let it get away. "So you think we must go now?" "I do." Valen finally released her. "Just be prepared to do anything." She nodded. They faced each other in the silence of the chamber. When it was clear neither had anything more to say, Ohali opened the door and went back into the cockpit. Aden and Oren co-skirted back, like they'd been trying to listen in the whole time. The human Padawan looked sheepishly at the deck, but Ohali ignored him. "We've come to a decision," she said. "You two will remain on my shuttle. Master Horn and I will take this ship and approach Mortis." "You're going without us," Aden said with surprising disappointment. Valen thought he'd be relieved. "There's no telling the dangers inside the monolith." Ohali put a hand on his shoulder. "Stay with the ship. Watch it. Track it if it begins to move. More Jedi are coming, but they're still days away. This is an essential task." He grimaced. "I understand, Master. I'll do it." Valen looked to his own apprentice, Oren Co. The Drethus nodded. "If that is your decision, Master." That oblong face was hard to read, but Valen caught a speck of disappointment in the Force. That was okay. As long as his apprentice stayed here, where it was safe, a part of the future was assured. "All right," he told Ohali. "Let's get going." Chapter 2. She'd been flying the scout ship for 20-plus years. She knew and trusted it as she did her own body. Still, Ohali's heart raced faster for every jerk and jostle as they flew toward Mortis. Valen was silent beside her. His last request was a tension lingering between them. She prayed his fear was groundless. It hadn't even occurred to her until now, but they couldn't be sure. This was a great dive into the unknown. She was afraid, but she had no regret, no doubts that they were on the right path. Every day of the past quarter century of her life had been built into this. She yearned to cradle the dagger in her hands and deliver it to Grand Master Skywalker. She wanted to see hope in the human's eyes. Everyone said that, after the disaster at Hapes, he acted stricken and half alive. Ohali wanted to give him comfort and life again. After all he'd been through, the Grand Master deserved that much at least. The monolith grew larger. Its smooth dark surface swelled until an entire pane filled their viewport with featureless black, eclipsing all stars, eclipsing everything. Valen breathed deep beside her. "Ohali," he said, "do you think?" Then there was a bright flash, an all-enveloping light and a comforting warmth. Ohali raised a hand to shield her eyes, then lowered it and tilted her head to escape the glare of the morning sun. The light was climbing higher and higher, peeking through the spires of the Coruscant skyline. "Ohali, are you all right?" asked a voice behind her. Ohali turned to see Natural wan, green skin warmed by the colors of early light, looking at her with faint concern. "I'm fine," she told the young Falleen. Natua stepped gingerly beside her. Wind played with the hems of their Padawan's tunics as they stood on the temple's observation deck. Natua crossed arms and said, "I think I know why you like this view so much." "Why?" Ohali asked. She did love this view. She loved to get up at dawn and watch Galactic City come to life as the traffic lanes grew thick in the sky. It was something of a morning ritual. Natua, by contrast, was a late riser, and Ohali couldn't recall her joining for dawn watch before. "Because it's busy," Natua said. "Matter of fact, you like the clamor of it? All those lights, all those people, never ever stopping." "That's not it," Ohali told her. "It's the piece I like. There are spaces in the speeder queues just before dawn. Whole patches of the sky are empty for now. They won't be empty for long." "I know. That's the point." Ohali waved a blue hand. "This is the closest to calm Coruscant ever has. But there's also so much potential out there. So many people who can do so many things, but they haven't yet. The day's just getting started." "You're such a philosopher," Natua jibed. "It's a nice way to start a day at all." Ohali turned from the skyline to face the Falleen. "But you're not supposed to watch it forever." "Good, because we do have other things to do. You remember our appointment with Master Ramus?" "How could I forget? We still have a few hours. We'll need them to get ready. Come on, let's go inside." Natua turned for the door first. Ohali spared one last look at the waning calm of morning, then followed her, and they went together inside the temple, two young Jedi with a lot of work to do, and their whole lives ahead of them. "You have to breathe deep, in and out, in and out. Get into a steady rhythm," Valen said as he knelt on the floor. His son was kneeling on the pad across from him, mirroring his pose. Stefan was only 6 years old, but his face was wrinkled in concentration. His small hands were fists atop his thighs. His lips were squeezed together, his cheeks slightly puffed. Frankly, he looked like he needed to use the refresher. "Breathe," Valen insisted, "and unclench those hands." The boy gave the mighty sigh and spread palms flat on his thighs. He kept his eyes shut. His forehead remained wrinkled. "Breathe in now," Valen instructed. "Then out, then in. You have to make it a natural cycle." Stefan kept his eyes closed, but he said, "Why does it matter how I breathe? I'm trying to move the ball. That's what matters." The metal ball, the same size as the boy's fist, sat on the floor between them. Valen said, "The Force reflects what it finds in you. Calm your body, calm your mind, and then you can affect the world around you. That's the key to being a Jedi." The boy, still grousing, cycled through long breaths and tried again. Valen tried to sound confident, but he had his own niggling skepticism. Force-based telekinesis had always been something his family struggled with. Even as a full-blown Jedi Master, he had trouble moving objects, though this small ball was doable, even for him. Stefan's mother wasn't a Jedi. All the Force talents the boy had he'd inherited from Valen alone. Likely Stefan would struggle with telekinesis all his life. But Valen needed to test his son and discover his talents and their limits. Stefan got a good cycle of breathing now. His pained expression relaxed. Valen felt his son find the place within himself from which he could work. The ball began to rise. If Stefan knew, he didn't show. His face retained the same tight expression as the ball rose higher and higher, above the crowns of their heads. When Valen was the boy's age, he'd never been able to do that. He broke out into a childish grin in front of his so serious son. "Stefan," he said, "open your eyes." Stefan's eyes opened. He saw the ball hovering over his head and gaped open mouth, astonished at himself. The ball dropped to the padded floor with a soft thud. Valen couldn't help himself. He lurched forward and gathered Stefan around the shoulders for an embrace. He'd never felt so proud of his son. "That was absolutely beautiful," he said. "Now come on, let's go tell your mother." "Okay," the boy said. "Is Aunt Gisela coming by later?" "Yep, she'll stop by for dinner. You can do a repeat performance for her." Stefan looked down at the ball, uncertain he could do it again. Valen laughed and mussed his hair. "You'll be fine. You've taken your first step into a larger world. I can't wait to see where the next ones take you." He stood up, took his son by his hand, and helped the boy rise. Then he released and let Stefan go first out of the room to find his mother. His steps were light and long. The boy was ready to brag, as he should. Valen's earliest memories were of his father teaching him the ways of the Force in the jungles and crumbling temples of Yavin 4. That Praxium was long gone, but Valen was glad to be able to pass on that learning. He felt certain Stefan would surpass him one day and become a greater Jedi than any Horn before him. It was all he'd ever wanted for his son. Aden and Orenco sat in the cockpit in awkward silence. They'd watched their masters depart in Valen Horn's ship, then watched the ship draw closer and closer to Mortis. And then, without a flash or energy flare, with no warning at all, the ship had simply disappeared. There was no hint of debris nor sign it had been there. Their masters had vanished into Mortis. Since then, neither had said a word. Aden knew the stories. He'd heard plenty from Ohali over the years. Supposedly, days on Mortis passed as minutes, even seconds for those outside the monolith. Time simply flowed differently. Seconds passed inside the shuttle, then minutes. Their masters did not return. Aden wanted to break the silence, but he wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure what to make of Orenco. He vaguely recalled hearing of Adretha's Jedi apprentice, and as he sat beside the stoic gray-skilled alien, he wondered how many standard years old he might be. Maybe over a century, but Orenco was thin and lanky, about the same size as Aden himself. He looked like a Padawan, but did he feel like one? Aden wasn't sure how to treat a century-old adolescent. He wasn't sure how any being could live for 100 years and not be experienced beyond human measure. He also couldn't wrap his mind around what it would be like to live for a millennium. He couldn't wrap his mind around Mortis either. Aden's only certainty was that he was grappling with things way beyond his comprehension. But that didn't mean he should sit and do nothing. After 5 minutes, and, perhaps, years on Mortis, Aden said, "Hey, do you think we've waited long enough?" Orenco turned his head and stared at Aden with tiny, inscrutable eyes. Waited for what? Waited for anything. They say time goes a lot faster in that thing. It's a rumor. We don't know for sure. But if it is true, then time's been rushing by and our masters are still stuck there. And that can't be good, can it? We have no way of knowing. Orenco shook his head. And doesn't that frustrate the hell out of you? Aden bleated. Orenco looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes. But we have our orders." Aden glanced out the viewport at that unreal black diamond. What happens if they never come out? Other Jedi are coming. Orenco's voice wavered. They're days away. That might be lifetimes inside Mortis. Perhaps. Do you want to go in there? Now. 10 minutes ago he'd been terrified of Mortis. He still was. But as he sat in the cockpit, he'd been seized by another terror that rivaled fear of death, fear of failure. He traveled with Master Ohali for years, crisscrossing the galaxy and learning so much. Though he still pined for Bastion, he also knew he'd gotten a vaster education with her than he ever could have inside the Empire. And there was more than fear, more than duty. The dagger they were searching for inside Mortis was supposed to be their insurance against Abeloth's distant but inevitable return. This was a mission to safeguard the life of the Jedi Order, even the entire galaxy. Aden never really thought it might fall into his hands. He'd always believed, assumed, that these thunderous fate of the galaxy missions fell to the likes of Grand Master Skywalker or Master Solo fell, the important people, the history makers, the Jedi who really mattered. Not apprentices like him. But the Force worked in mysterious ways. The future of everybody might be in Aden's lowly hands after all. He wanted to scream, run into hyperspace, and fly into Mortis all at once. He had to pick one of those. So he grabbed the shuttle's controls, pumped power to engines, and kicked them ahead. Orenco immediately grabbed his arm, sharp talon stabbed into the fabric of his jacket. "You cannot. Our masters told us to stay. They might need our help." "You don't know that." "Well, there's one way to find out." and we're not helping anyone sitting here. As the shuttle shuddered with gradual acceleration, he looked at Orenco. Don't tell me you've never wanted to make history. The Drethus looked at the growing shape of Mortis. I expected to become history. Aden understood. Hadn't there been some famous Drethus master, eons ago, who'd written all sorts of histories about the stuff he alone had lived through? Maybe that was the only fate for a Jedi like Orenco, to become a living slice of history. Then he noticed the past tense. Expected. Aden said, just think about the story you can tell little Padawans someday, like 500 years from now. You'll get to brag how you were the one who... He didn't finish his sentence. Light and warmth washed away the universe. It was a difficult struggle, but the Jedi overcame, Orenco said. We always do. The apprentices seated in the chamber around him looked up at the old Drethus in admiration. One asked what happened to the lost tribe of the Sith after they were defeated. Many of them scattered across the stars. Some returned to their homeworld, Kash, but others may have joined a different group of Sith. Of course, we defeated those too, in time. Another apprentice asked, how did the lost tribe manage to do so many bad things on Coruscant? You said they killed millions. They had the dark side at their command, said Orenco. When they concentrated their power, they accomplished terrible things. It was a vague answer. He thought there might have been more to it than that. Some other threat that had combined with the lost tribe to wreak havoc, but he couldn't call it to mind. That had been centuries ago. He wondered if age wasn't getting to him after all. That same apprentice asked, Master, did you ever meet Luke Skywalker? That was a name that echoed in legend. Even after so much time, the human was vaunted as the son of the chosen one who'd rebuilt the Order into the flourishing thing it was today. But had Orenco ever met him? The Drethus was confounded. He just wasn't sure. He'd been only a Padawan during Luke Skywalker's waning years, and if he'd ever met the legendary one, it would only have been briefly. The Padawans were looking at him hopefully. Orenco couldn't bear to let them down, so he said, I knew him a little. There was years of wisdom in his words, but always, I thought, a little youthful hopefulness in his eyes. It inspired us all and told us all things were possible if we followed the path of the Jedi. The Padawans grinned happily and continued to stare at Orenco in adoration. Though it was a little shameful to admit, he basked in their praise. Orenco's name would never resound like Luke Skywalker's. He'd had a respectable career as a Jedi, of course. He trained many students and collected much wisdom. He was honored by his peers and maybe even loved. Yet he'd achieved no great feats, nothing that would make his own name immortal in Jedi annals millennia hence. But Orenco was all right with that. He could pass on his memories of ancient times, and seeing them live again, just a little, in the eyes of these impressionable Padawans made his life worthwhile. In truth, Orenco reflected, this was all he'd ever wanted. Somehow, Aden knew this wasn't right. It felt right. It felt more than right. It felt perfect. He was a respected master. The Jedi Academy on Bastion was safe and flourishing. He drew admiring looks from all the apprentices and knights he passed in the corridors. This was what he'd wanted from his life, ever since he was a child. But perfection unsettled him. Time and again he'd been told, by Master Solo Fell, by Ohali, and more, that the galaxy was never going to give him what he wanted, that he had to learn to live without perfection, but at the same time, he must never stop seeking it. Yes, that was how Master Ohali had phrased it. He must never stop seeking, because finding things was his talent. When he was after something specific and concrete, when he could picture it in his mind, the Force nudged him where to find it. That was his talent. It was why he'd been paired with Ohali Soroc and spent years crisscrossing the galaxy with her as they searched for something. As he passed a cluster of Padawans, the eldest no more than 15 or 16 years, Aden stopped in the academy hall and watched them go by. He'd been around that age when he'd apprenticed to Ohali. There was something different about her that set her apart from the other Jedi, and at first he hadn't been happy to be taken away from Bastion, but he couldn't remember what was so different. He couldn't remember what they'd been trying to find. Aden felt dizzy and braced himself against one metal wall. His head throbbed. He wasn't sure what brought on his migraine, but he winced and rubbed a hand over his temple, then his face. His hand felt soft. Aden looked at it and saw the rough, callous palm of a middle-aged man. He didn't understand what was happening and decided to check with the Academy's medic. Aden began working his way through the Academy's interior labyrinth. Gray metal wall corridors twisted and crisscrossed, seemingly endlessly. This was a Jedi Academy, but it was also in the Empire, and looked it. But Aden didn't hesitate as he navigated every turn. After all, wayfinding was his talent. But once he reached the door to the infirmary, he felt certain this was not where he was supposed to be. For the first time it occurred to him that he might be dreaming. He touched the cold, hard walls, then gave his face a single slap to assure himself that he was awake, and this was real. His cheek stung. He was awake, but he wasn't sure this was real. Alternatively, it was real, and he was just crazy. Because he didn't know what else to do, Aden stabbed the door controls and opened the infirmary. He walked straight past two Padawan nurses toward the familiar figure of the Academy's chief healer. The white-haired woman was reviewing her datapad and turned a pleasant smile on Aden. "Is there a problem, Master Tohri?" she asked. "I've been having headaches," he said, "and dizziness. I think something might be wrong with me." "Well, sit down, and we'll see what we can do." She gestured to a nearby open bed. Aden sat atop it without laying back. "I wondered if you could help me with something," he said as she touched his scalp with her gentle fingertips. "Did you ever know Master Ohali Soroc?" "Soroc? No, I can't say I have. Is that a human name?" "No, it's Duros. She was my teacher." He stumbled over the past tense. She was his teacher in the past. What was she now? Was she even alive? "I'm sorry, Master Tohri," she said. "Why are you asking about her?" I'd like to talk to her." "I don't know where she'd be. There's no Duros currently at this academy. But of course, it's a huge galaxy." She said something more, but it didn't register to Aden. It was a huge, incomprehensibly vast galaxy full of unthinkable wonders and confounding mysteries. He traveled widely with Master Ohali and seen many of them. But why had they been traveling? The explanation defied him. Aden winced as he felt the healer gently probing his mind with the Force. "I need to talk to her. To Ohali Soroc. You need to go up to the comm center for that. Now please lie back. I feel like I'm getting hints of something." "No," said Aden, and he wrenched himself off the bed and onto his feet. She frowned. "Master Tohri, what's wrong? You're acting very unusual." "You mean like I'm not myself?" "Well, maybe you're not you, Doc. You ever think of that?" He laughed at her confused expression, but the statement jarred something inside him. For a second it seemed like the entire academy, the whole world around him, was an illusion conjured in a twisted mirror. Or maybe he really was crazy. One thing he did know, he had to find Ohali Soroc wherever she was. Aden stormed out of the infirmary, leaving the confused healer behind. He made his way through the academy's empire gray maze once more, this time heading for the comms tower near the top of the pyramid. Once again he scoured his memories, trying to summon everything he'd done with Ohali, what they'd been trying to do, whether they succeeded on their quest. Yes, that was it. She'd been a quest knight, something different that had set her apart from all the other knights in the order. But questing for what? He needed answers. He needed to find her. He fell back on a Jedi's only reliable tool, the Force. When he focused on something he truly needed, the Force nudged him in his direction. That was his talent. Granted, that Force couldn't guide him across light years, but maybe, he hoped, it would at least point him in the general direction. There it was. He felt her. Ohali? She was close by. He was certain of it. He didn't understand how that was possible. Why a far-ranging Jedi like Ohali would be here on Bastion, especially after the healer had just insisted there were no Duros at the academy right now. Unless she was wrong. Unless this wasn't Bastion. The hall spun around him. Aden staggered through the maze, following not memory, or even his eyes, just chasing the Force around bends and through doors as he sought the familiar emanations of his teacher. And he was drawing close. He was certain of it. A few more doors and he could find her, and then together they'd escape this maze they were in, this maze he was certain wasn't Bastion, at all but someplace else, someplace he should have known but didn't. Aden was dizzy, dazed, and out of breath when he pushed through the final door and found Ohali Soroc at last, standing in golden sunlight amidst a field of white flowers. Hana City was beautiful in the springtime. The chandrillan poplars lining the streets exploded into pale blossoms that perfectly matched the alabaster sheen of the metropolis's elegant skyscrapers. The hills to the west became an emerald surge, and the gardens in the city's park were full of fragrant flowers. Ohali enjoyed Coruscant, its night as well as mornings, but it was good to get away now and then. She and Natua, one had been sent to Chandrila on a diplomatic mission, but they'd been granted some free time to explore Hana City and enjoy its perfect spring scenes. Ohali had savored Natua's company these past weeks. Their time together felt precious but tinged bittersweet. She wasn't sure why she felt that way, but she did. She felt like every moment was borrowed, though she didn't know from whom. They were walking down a winding lane through a field of white flowers, discussing what they'd do once they got back to Coruscant when Ohali heard her name being called. She turned around. Her jaw dropped. Running toward her, trampling the flower bed with black boots, was a figure in a black cloak. She couldn't make out the face beneath the hood, but she caught the gilded flare of venomous eyes and felt dangerous swirls of the dark side. "Get back!" Ohali shouted to Natua. "It's a Sith." She almost said, "A Sith, like the one who killed you." Ohali's own thoughts shocked and confused her. It almost cost her everything. The dark-shrouded figure came nearer, almost close enough to strike. Ohali fumbled for her lightsaber and ignited it. Her silver blade reached out, and the dark figure skidded to a halt. The figure called, "Master Soroc, stand down." "Get back!" Ohali snapped. "I won't let you harm her again." She lunged at the Sith. A red blade extended from the Sith's hand to block her. She swung 2 more times, forcing the Sith back across the flower field. "You don't want to do this," the Sith warned. "You have no idea what's going on." "I said get back," Ohali said, and struck again. She was surprised by her own ferocity, but absolutely could not, allow the Sith to hurt her friend. To kill her again? Ohali felt dazed, her legs buckled. The Sith swung at her blade, trying to knock it aside. She parried, twisted her silver spear, then thrust for the Sith's heart. The cloaked figure barely jumped back in time. "Stop," he shouted. It was a man's voice, almost familiar. She couldn't imagine why. "How did you find us?" Ohali panted. "What do you want from us?" The Sith seemed to waver. "Master Soroc." "Natua. Together I think we can take him." Ohali snapped a glance over her shoulder, hoping her friend was also armed and ready to fight. Together they could protect each other, save each other, and take down the Sith menace. But Natua wasn't there. The world spun around Ohali. She turned on her heels. She looked all around the garden, squinted at the sun-bright flower bed, and discovered she was alone. Just her and the Sith. The world kept spinning. Ohali turned to face the dark figure, struggled to balance, and hefted her blade to block the next attack. But the Sith did not draw closer. "I'm not your enemy," the man beneath the hood told her. "Put your saber down." "I know what you are," Ohali breathed. "I don't know where you came from or how you got here." "I came here with you," he insisted. "We came here together. For the quest." Quest. The word reverberated like a great bell in her skull, tolling not just meaning but purpose. For her, the quest was everything. It was her purpose as a Jedi to rove and seek and struggle, to quest after one singular goal. One goal. One word. It struggled to her lips. It escaped as a whisper, Mortis. The chandrillan sun flared above her. The flower field reflected its brilliance and the whole world exploded into white. With a cry, Ohali covered her eyes with one hand. The other held out the lightsaber in useless defense. When she opened her eyes and lowered her hand, the flower field was gone. Chandrila and the sun were gone. She was in another world entirely. It was a world of ruin. Gray clouds churned an overcast sky. She stood on a plain of broken rock, with dry grasses springing tall from between its cracks. Walls of mortared stone, partially collapsed and overgrown with ugly vines, rose to her right. Ohali craned her neck further and saw the surge of some ancient citadel tower. It must have stood tall and straight once, but now it slanted dangerously, its foundations partway crumbled beneath. There was one figure standing in front of her. It was a Sith no longer, only a tall, thin, teenage human with a dark face and wide, beseeching eyes. "Master Soroc," pleaded her apprentice, Aden Tohri, "do you know where you are?" Ohali breathed deep, then said again, "Mortis?" The object of her quest. Aden nodded shakily and shut off the lightsaber, blue-bladed, held in both hands. "I think so. And if it's not Mortis, it's someplace just as weird." "No," she said, looking at the citadel. "We are here. Do you recognize the citadel? Were you told about it?" No, she thought. She didn't need the citadel to know where she was. She felt it in the air, the way the force flitted with every eddy and flow. It was like no place she'd ever experienced. Zanima II, which she'd visited once as a youth, had also felt inherently potent, but on that living world the force had moved with the orchestrations of its governing consciousness. Not so here. Though the rocky plain on which they stood was outwardly still, Ohali felt like she was submerged in a chaotic sea. Her heart keened with memory of Chandrila's illusory splendor. Even more, she ached at the thought of Natua. It had felt so good being with her again. After over 20 years, all her memories of her lost friend had been reanimated with perfection. She hadn't doubted her youth returned until Aden had intruded on it. "I believe the force is wild here," Ohali said. "Mortis was always rich with it, richer than any world we've known. It was the clay the ones used to reshape reality whichever way they saw fit. But there are no ones now. Mortis is puissant but uncontrolled. I believe just by being here, we reshaped reality, our reality, at least, without realizing it." Aden thought about that. "Master, where were we? I saw a flower bed. And for a second, just when I came in, I thought I saw a shadow standing beside you." Ohali looked at the rocky earth and felt sorrow in her heart. "You can't call it a shadow, or a memory. Something I lost a long time ago, but here I could recover just a speck of it." Aden said nothing. He was young and lucky, she reminded herself. His world was still potential and not regret. She asked him, "What did you experience?" Aden looked at his hand. "I was older, a master in my own right, living on Bastion. Everything was so perfect. I knew it had to be a lie." Ohali chastened herself. He was young and impetuous, but in his own way wise. If it weren't for him, she might have spent the rest of forever happily in cage of her own making. Thoughtfully, Aden said, "The reality around us became what we wanted it to. Is that right? The force manifests what we desire and what we fear," Ohali said. "When you first appeared, my eyes saw a Sith. That was why I attacked you." She looked shamefully at the lightsaber in her hand. Being young, Aden was also generous. "It's all right. You didn't know what you were doing. But Master Horn and Oren Co have to be in here too. We have to find the man." Rouse them from the happy dream. Ohali drew herself straight. "Our nightmare?" Aden warned. "Or that? Do you think you can find either of them in this ruin?" "I'll try." His face went hard with concentration. Looking like the Jedi Knight he was becoming, he reached into the Force to find their way. Two beasts were approaching. Oren Co was certain of it. He didn't know how wild animals had gotten loose within the halls of the Asis temple, but he could feel them, hungry, predatory, and dangerous. The young apprentices must have felt it too, because wide-eyed panic spread on their faces and they swarmed around him, begging for help. "Master, you have to do something," cried a little Rodian. "We need you, Master. Save us," pleaded a small human girl. Oren Co was several centuries past his physical prime, and he'd never been a great warrior even then, but he still carried his lightsaber. He wrapped long-clawed hands around the metal cylinder, almost as old as he was, and removed it from the sash around his waist. "Stay in the study room, children," he said. "I swear I'll protect you." He stepped carefully out of the chamber and closed the door behind him, sealing the younglings inside. Orenko began walking down the stone corridors of the old temple, searching with the force for the source of the echoing, panicked shouts. He was more certain than ever that there were two monsters inside the temple. He didn't relish taking lives, even those of animals, but he'd do whatever is necessary for the sake of the other Jedi, especially the cowering children who looked to their old sage for salvation. Orenko surprised himself by how quickly his old body moved. He followed the force and the sounds of violence until he reached the temple's largest mess hall. Tables had been thrown onto their sides like barricades for knights and apprentices to hide behind. In the open center of the space, utterly incongruous to the temple's sheltered interior, were a pair of prowling Nexu. A small rational part of his mind exclaimed that this must be a dream, that there was no way two massive predatory beasts could have ever reached the heart of the temple. The rest of him accepted the scene implicitly. In fact, it felt like he'd done this before. He couldn't recall when or how he'd faced down a pair of Nexu. Maybe it was one of those things that had happened so long ago the centuries-old memory had faded. But he knew in his heart what he had to do. Orenko ignited his ancient lightsaber and stepped into the middle of the hall. Cowering Jedi whispered and begged him to help. The Nexu in the center crouched like they were ready to spring. The spines on their backs stood on end and their tails writhed eagerly. But he didn't flinch. He waved his bright blade back and forth to ward them off and said aloud, "Go back where you came from. This is not the place for you." A Jedi behind him cried, "Kill them, Master, before they kill you." Another said, "You can't take the risk. Kill them." He was ready to slay if he must, but, after all these years, his empathic connection to other beings was still his greatest strength. Thus, he reached out to creatures. He tried to soothe their hunger and stoke their fear. Go back, go back, go back," he told them. "Your place is not here. Leave these Jedi be." What happened next was completely unexpected. These Nexu spoke back. "This is where we belong," they spoke to his mind. "This is where you belong, but it is not what you think it is." Orenko wavered. He stared at the serrated, slavering jaws of beasts who did not pounce. Confused but adamant, he told them, "I will not let you harm these Jedi." And they said, "They are not Jedi. They are not even here." Orenko risked a sideways glance. A group of young Padawans still cowered behind the nearest table. He turned to face the Nexu again and waved his lightsaber. "They are here, and I will protect them." "What are you?" They said, "We are what you should protect. Feel us, Orenko, and feel them." He felt the Nexu already. They didn't feel like beasts at all. There was no animal hunger. They offered him sympathy. And as for the Padawans, he felt nothing. Orenko twitched a glance at the children, focused, tried to sense them again in the force. But it was like nothing was there. He didn't understand. He watched the bristling Nexu and tried to survey the entire room in the force. None of the other Jedi were there. The room was empty. It was not even a room. He felt a fierce wind blowing, swirling, and chaotic, a wind that should never have been possible in this indoor space. These walls and turned-over tables and frantic Jedi begging for help were all illusions. Even his own body was illusion. Orenko felt the weight of accumulated centuries slide off him and dissolve, leaving him with the narrow frame and strong limbs of a youth again. Force winds swirled around like they would carry him away. The walls and tables and metal and stone and brick of the ancient Asa's temple were swept aside like they were made of flimsy. The whole world was made of flimsy except for two souls, alive with the Force. "What are you?" he begged the Nexu who were not Nexu. "We are as you," one said. "We are Jedi." The other said, "This is Mortis." The word was like a crashing bell. It vibrated inside Orenko's head. He dropped his lightsaber, collapsed to his knees, and ran frantic claws over his shuddering skull. It felt like the reverberations would dissolve his very brain. But, after a moment or a century, the bell tolls died away. There was silence in his head, silence and clarity. The winds of the Force still blew but no longer threatened to spill him over. Slowly, very carefully, Orenko opened his eyes. He crouched in the wreckage of a great gathering hall. Stone slabs had fallen from the high ceiling and gathered dust on the cracked stone floor. Patches of milky light fell through the gaps. Standing in one patch was a Duros in the tunic of a Jedi. In another, a young human in the same garb. Ohali Soroc and Aden Tohri. He looked at the patch of overcast sky through the broken ceiling. Mortis. His lightsaber was still in his talons. Hand shaking, he hooked it to his bandolier. Then he asked the most pressing thing on his mind, where is Master Horn? Ohali looked to Aden. The human said, I can feel him nearby, but I'm not sure where he is exactly. Where were you? Ohali asked. Oren-Ko breathed deep. This was Mortis. He could feel the force still moving around him like a chaotic wind. He tried to steady himself. It was an illusion, he said. I thought I was at the Asis temple, and older. Was it a good dream? Asked Aden. Yes, Oren-Ko thought. He hadn't been a great hero, but he'd been a respected master living in peace with the Force. That was, really, all he wanted. It was a good dream, he told them, until there were intruders. Aden grimaced. Ohali said, Master Horn may not welcome our presence. Oren-Ko shook his head. I don't understand. What is this we're experiencing? The world as we want it, Ohali said solemnly. What you felt wasn't reality, but it was more than a dream. The Force is raw and chaotic here. The ones used to command it. With them gone, we stir its flow instead. Whether we mean to or not, Aden added. This was all beyond Oren-Ko's understanding. It was beyond his companions too, which didn't make him feel better, but at least he didn't feel alone. He asked Aden, where's Master Horn? I'll take you to him. Looking older than his scant years, the human raised the lightsaber in his hand. Chapter 3. Valen Horn had never really had a home growing up. He spent some early years on Yavin 4 before the Yuuzhan Vong invaded, then been placed in the Maul shelter, which had turned out to be anything but. He'd spent years on Asis and years on Coruscant, never really growing attached to any particular place. It was a little ironic, then, that he'd ended up with a home on the Gold Beach coastline of Corellia, the same world where his parents had grown up. He'd never been much of a Five Brothers patriot, but marrying a Corellian woman had given him new appreciation for his ancestry. He was glad to be able to live here, and to train his son as a Jedi on the beautiful shores. Sinaya and Stefan were playing in the surf now, mother chasing son, in and out of the rolling, foaming tide. Valen sat in the shade of a tree beyond the beach's edge, his sister at his side. The ocean air was warm and thick, salty but soothing. He asked Gisela, do you know what I feel sometimes when I see them like this? He gestured to Sinaya and Stefan standing in the white crash of a wave. Gisela leaned forward, hugging knees to her chest. Happy. Content. Sure, Valen said, but I also feel relieved. His sister tilted her head. Why relieved? I don't know exactly, he admitted. Sinya and Stefan giggled in the surf. Their laughter was like faint music. Were you expecting something bad to happen? Asked Gisela. He opened his mouth to say no, but discovered he wasn't sure. He said, being a Jedi isn't supposed to be easy. And I remember Dad telling us it gets harder, at least more complicated, the older you get. I guess I was bracing myself for something bad. Not this. He waved again at the oceanside idol. Gisela hummed thoughtfully but said nothing. Valen looked sideways at his younger sister. Growing up, he'd always had a protective streak toward her. He still did. Looking at her, he felt that she'd been in great danger once, that they'd both been in great danger. It hadn't been a passing danger either. It was the kind that could haunt them the rest of their lives. A danger, but he couldn't remember what. It wasn't right. Valen shivered in the warm sunlight. What's wrong? Asked Gisela. He hesitated. Do you even feel there's something, I don't know, missing? You were just saying how happy and relieved you were. What's missing? I don't know. He truly didn't. His own thoughts confounded him. As he tried to understand, Gisela twisted around and glanced behind them. Look, she said. Company. Valen turned too. He saw three figures cresting the ridge behind them. They were approaching him slowly but not casually. There was stiff tension in their strides. Valen felt a spike of alarm and stood, but when he saw them clearly, he knew them all. In the lead was Ohali Soroc, whom he'd known since he was young. He recognized the human youth as Aden Tohri, her apprentice. He recalled that Drethus was named Orenco, though Valen couldn't recall where they'd met before. They were all fellow Jedi. Except, Valen felt with a flash of intuition, they were not. These were imposters. He didn't understand if they were illusions, Sith in clever disguise, or something else. He only knew with absolute certainty that these were not comrades. These were a threat. He dropped to a crouch and fumbled through the blankets and bags gathered in the shade. He cursed himself for not bringing his lightsaber to the beach. To Gisela he said, "You have to get Senaya and Stefan away from here. I'll try to hold them off somehow. They look like Jedi but there." "Imposters," Gisela completed, voice still hard. "Exactly. Of course she would understand." He and his sister had always been in perfect sync. He looked at her and saw she was holding out a lightsaber. His lightsaber. He stared at the weapon. "You brought it." "Good Jedi never leaves home without one," she said, then gave a chagrined smile. "Except I forgot mine." "Oops." "That's okay. Just protect Senya and Stefan." Valen snatched up the weapon, faced the approaching imposters, and thumbed the trigger. The cylinder hummed like music in his hand. The stretched green blade was beautiful. It glowed brightly even in the bright midday sun. "Don't worry, I'll take care of them," Gisela said. Her smile grew wider, and her eyes twinkled like stars. "You take care of the intruders." As soon as Valen's blade switched on, Ohali's heart sank. Her worst fears were coming true here on this beautiful illusory shore. Ohali ignited her lightsaber in turn. Aden hesitated, then turned his on. He looked beseechingly to his master. "What's happening? Who does he think we are?" "Imposters," Ohali said. Her eyes locked on Valen as he approached, but her memory reached back 20 years to poor Natural Wan, whose voice had rasped and eyes teared as she'd explained how certain she'd been in her psychosis, how helpless Abeloth's delusions had made her. And she remembered Valen pleading, before their descent into Mortis, that she kill him if he succumbed to Abeloth's power once more. However, Ohali wasn't sure this was Abeloth. She never experienced the creature's evil firsthand, thankfully, but she had encountered the dark side, and she felt none of that malingering evil on Mortis, even now. The enemy they faced here might have been conjured entirely from Valen's nightmares. Ohali hoped and prayed, but she wasn't certain. As Valen approached a second, shadowy figure lingered by the tree under which he'd sat. It was a woman, but everything about her was blurred, like Ohali's eyes refused to focus. As he approached, Valen called, "What are you? Who sent you here?" "Master Horn, it's us," Aden said helplessly. "Don't you recognize us?" "I know who you're pretending to be, but you're not Jedi," Valen sneered and waved his saber tip at them. "Valen, how do you know?" asked Ohali. The human wavered, then his expression settled hard. "I feel it. You're imposters. You're here to hurt my family." Without taking eyes off them, he waved one hand toward the shoreline. But Ohali saw no people there, only crashing waves. The shadowy figure remained by the tree. Ohali knew it was futile, but she tried to reason with him. "Valen, you're confused. We're real, but this place isn't. We're not on the beach. We're on Mortis." She'd hoped for some spark of recognition at the name, instead his face screwed in confusion. The woman in shadow called something. Her words, like her shape, was blurred beyond Ohali's recognition, but Valen seemed to understand and obey. He lunged, throwing himself at Ohali first. She raised her lightsaber to block one heavy blow, then another. Valen was attacking wildly, with anger in his eyes and his heart. Aden, shocked and terrified, stayed back. Orenco hadn't even turned on his lightsaber. Valen had begged her to kill him if he succumbed to psychosis. Ohali wasn't sure she could, even if she wanted to. Valen Horn was a fine swordsman, and he attacked without reservation. It took all her effort to defend herself. Aden saw that. Her apprentice finally swallowed his fear and called, "Get back from her." Valen stepped away from Ohali, then lunged at the younger Jedi. Aden stumbled and struggled to block the fresh rain of blows. He was outmatched and couldn't last long. Ohali leaped into the fray herself and struck at Valen's flank. She swung with brutal purpose, ready to maim and even kill her friend to protect her apprentice. But Valen was still a better fighter than either of them. He danced in the unreal sunlight, blocking and attacking, keeping them both at bay. Ohali remained standing, lightsaber quiet in his hand. Ohali shouted, "Help him. If you can reach your master, do it." If anyone could reach Valen, it was the one who'd been his student for 10 years, the one who studied with him and knew him better than anyone. And if Ohali couldn't do it, then at least one Jedi was going to die in the illusory reality of Mortis. Standing to the side like a coward, watching Ohali and Aden struggle to contain his master's wild attacks, Ohali tried to show Valen the truth. He didn't have to reach for his master in the Force. Valen was a blaze of desperation and anger and fear, all of it wild and uncontrolled, totally unlike the teacher he'd known. It frightened him. Ohali tried to find the bond they'd established with his natural empathic skills, but in his frenzy Valen resisted. Ohali pressed harder, speaking into his master's mind, telling him, "We are not your enemy, we are not imposters, we are your friends." For a second Valen staggered and swayed on both feet. Ohali and Aden stayed back, watching and hoping. Then Valen wheeled and leaped for Ohali. The Drethus had to roll out of the way of his cleaving saber strike. He couldn't even get to his feet before Valen was on him again. Ohali ignited his lightsaber just in time to catch the downward blow. He held his blade in two hands but remained pinned beneath the weight of Valen's attack. "Master, you know me," he cried aloud. "I'm Ohali. I know what you are." Valen snarled. "Imposter." "I'm not an imposter. I'm your apprentice." Doubt flickered in Valen's face at the word. Then Ohali and Aden came at him from either side. Valen ducked Aden's wild swipe and parried Ohali's more precise blow. Ohali scrambled upright. Valen had his back turned, but he didn't dare lunge at his master, even now, even when Ohali called to him in the Force, telling him, with grief and desperation, to attack before Valen killed someone, even if it meant slaying Valen instead. If he killed his own teacher, he'd have to carry that scar for centuries until he died. Ohali couldn't do it. Maybe it made him a coward, but he couldn't do it. Instead he yelled, "Master, please. You can't let Abeloth win." Valen was in the middle of a horizontal swipe. His hands wavered. Ohali tipped the blade of her saber beneath Valen's, then flicked it up again. It sheared through the emitter of Valen's weapon, causing it to explode in smoke and sparks. Valen shouted in pain and dropped the burning wreckage. The three Jedi advanced on him from all sides. Valen looked at the creatures coming at him with burning blades. They were imposters, but he recognized their faces. Ohali Soroc, whom he'd known for years, her apprentice Aden Tohri, and that Drethus Ohali, the one he couldn't place. The one who claimed to be his apprentice. The one who said the name Abeloth. The word shook something inside him. He knew the name. He whispered it as he stared at the burns on his right hand. The portentous syllables sounded familiar on his tongue. He didn't know what those sounds meant, but he was certain he had once. He just couldn't remember. The imposters had him surrounded. Their blade tips pointed at him and blocked off every movement. Frantically clutching his burnt hand with his good one, Valen looked around the shoreline. He saw Gisela standing in the shade of the tree, simply watching. Did the imposters not see her? Did they not care? He looked to the sandy beach, but he didn't see either Senya or Stefan. In the glaring sun, he couldn't even see tracks in the sand. It was like they'd never been present at all. Maybe they hadn't. Panting, gnashing his teeth, Valen spun in a circle. He settled on familiar, mysterious Ohali and said, "You're not my apprentice. I don't even know you." "You have taught me for 10 years, Ohali said sadly. Then, for the first time in seemingly forever, his sister called to him. "You can't trust them," Gisela said. "You can only trust me." The imposters kept staring at Valen, like they hadn't heard her, but he pivoted toward his sister. She was stepped out from the shade of the tree, into the bright sunlight, but a darkness lingered on her face. She smiled a wide smile, and he saw a brighter twinkling in the darkness of her eyes. In that moment she was more than just his sister. She was his purpose, his love, his queen of all the stars. She lobbed one arm in an underhanded toss. A pinwheeling object appeared out of thin air. Valen held out his hand and caught it, a lightsaber. He squeezed the button. The blade that extended was purest black. He stared at it, a mystifying absence of light beneath the bright Corellian sun. He'd never seen a weapon like this or known of its existence, but it pulsed power into his hand and through his body. This was more than a lightsaber. This was a blade so powerful it could render the raw material of the Force itself. "Kill them," Gisela said. "For me?" He attacked Ohali first. She was the most experienced, the most powerful. She barely deflected his blade of purest night. Orenco and Aden were too stunned to respond immediately. After he beat Ohali back 2 steps, Valen snapped a sidekick and took Aden in the stomach, bowing him over. He spun around, raised his blade, and prepared to drive it through the back of the young human's neck. Orenco lurched forward and deflected the downward thrust with a horizontal swipe. He interposed himself between Valen and Aden and began battling the older human. His attacks were desperate and uneven. Valen knew how to counter them. He knew Orenco, his footwork, his tells, the way he felt in the Force, like they'd worked together for years. Like Orenco really was his apprentice. Valen slipped a thrust past the Drethus's defenses and stabbed him in the right bicep. Orenco cried out and dropped his saber. Valen stepped in, kicked it away, then ready to take his opponent's head with one horizontal sweep. He pulled back. He swung. His blade froze an inch from Orenco's gray-skinned neck. The Drethus looked into Valen's eyes. His sharp-toothed jaw hinged open, and he whispered, "Please, Master, don't let me end like this." A twitch of the wrist was all it would take. One twitch and his blade, his unreal, unnatural, wrong black blade, would sever Orenco's head from his shoulders. He stole centuries of life the Drethus had in store, a greater allotment of time than a human like Valen could ever conceive. He had to remind himself, very forcefully, that this was an imposter. Not his apprentice, not a Drethus at all probably. Some illusion conjured by the Force, by the Sith, by some great evil. By Abeloth. His head spun. Sunlight shuddered. The world tilted off balance. Valen gritted his teeth, staring into Orenco's small pleading eyes, and willed himself to make the killing blow. "Valen, you can't do this, Ohali," the thing like Ohali pleaded. "Master, no," whimpered the thing like Aden Tohri. And Valen wondered how he'd even recognized Ohali's apprentice, when he hadn't even seen Ohali in years. After all, he was on Corellia with his family, and she was roving the galaxy far and wide. She had a quest for a place, a weapon, a tool that would ensure the defeat of an enemy even greater than the Sith. "Kill him," his sister's voice urged. "Kill them all. Do it." It was Gisela's voice, but not words she would ever say. Dazed, black blade wavering beside Orenco's neck, Valen shifted his head and saw Gisela's shape a few meters away. The sun stayed bright, but her eyes were darker than ever, darker and bigger. He looked at them and into them and saw a field of stars in the depths of her skull. This was not his sister in front of him. If she was an imposter, then the Jedi he battled, the beach he stood on, his very world, and the life he lived in peace, training his only son to be a Jedi. If all of them were illusory, his heart would break. "Do as I command," hissed venom in his sister's voice. "Destroy them?" He drew his dark blade away from Orenco's neck. The Drethus sighed deeply in relief. Holding the blade vertically above his head, Valen asked, "Where am I?" His apprentice said, "Mortis. Mortis. Abeloth." Like pieces in a puzzle, they clicked into place. The world around him trembled. Cracks formed in the bright sky. Shards of daylight fell and crashed into the dusty earth, revealing windows of true night. "No!" the Gisela thing wailed. She swung her arms like a mad woman. Tentacles of force materialized out of nothing. One whipped into Orenco's side. Ribs cracked and he went flying off his feet. Aden pivoted and raised his lightsaber, but another tentacle tore the weapon from his hand. A third opaque tentacle lifted against the crumbling sky. It would take a second to crash through Valen, but a second took forever. He understood, finally, where he was and what had happened. He understood the joy he'd felt was an illusion, and it almost broke his heart. Almost, but did not. In that timeless second, Valen realized he could mourn for perfection lost, or he could cherish the fleeting dream and move on. He chose the latter. His arm, already poised, swung down. He released the all-black blade, and it flew like a spear into the chest of the thing shaped like his sister. The thing he called Abeloth. The creature's mouth dropped in shock. Its eyes grew wider and wider. The blackness and stars grew deeper until it seemed like they'd all be devoured in a cosmic void. Then the stars flickered out. Valen and the world were plunged into total blackness. This was not death. At least, it wasn't oblivion. He could hear his own rasping breath and the pants of the other Jedi. He felt them in the Force, and he knew them. He remembered his years of training with Ohali and the grim devotion with which she accepted her role as a quest knight. He recalled Aden Tohri in the brief time he'd known him, and the way anxiety and devotion warred inside the young man. He certainly knew Oren Ko, his apprentice of 10 years, and as true a son as any he'd ever have. Darkness faded to gloom. Valen found himself standing on broad arena floor. His stones were gray and worn and cracked, but he could make out a symbol made of ovals and curves colored dark and light, the tones in equal balance. He looked up. The tiers above the arena were a crumbling ruin. Beyond them, a citadel tower slanted precariously beneath the roof of ominous clouds. A swirling wind blew around him. Blowing with it, he felt chaotic swirls of the Force itself. Ohali and Aden stood beside him. The Duros approached him first and asked, "Valen, are you with us?" "Yes," he breathed and looked around. Oren Ko lay prone and injured on the rock. He hurried to his apprentice, bent and put a hand on his shoulder. The Drethys flinched slightly. Valen squeezed and said, "I remember now. Oren Ko, I am so sorry." "It's all right, Master." Oren Ko's voice cracked. I am glad to have you wish us again." Valen wanted to embrace Oren Ko but didn't want to injure the Drethys further. He rose and looked at the other Jedi. Aden's expression was still wary, but Ohali's flat face was split by a grin. "It's over," Valen said, half telling, half questioning. "Yes," Ohali said, still smiling. "I believe it is." She lifted a hand and pointed. An object protruded from the nearest arena wall. The Jedi approached it together slowly. It was the handle of a weapon whose two-sided metal blade was speared into the crumbling rock at chest height, as if it had been thrown. They stared at it in solemn silence. Aden was the one to ask, "Is that it?" "Its size and shape matched the description we were given," his master said. Ohali stepped closer. Valen could feel her anticipation, her need. She'd spent half her life seeking the Mortis Dagger. Now it was meters away. "Go," Valen told her. "You've earned it." Ohali's eyes widened. She nodded and stepped closer, one hand out. Valen approached the weapon from the other side. The entire thing seemed to have been smelted from one piece of dully gleaming metal, though dried material, dirted cloth or leathers, had been wrapped around the handle. There was no guard around the blade. Metal simply tapered to a flat double edge. "Are we sure it is safe to touch?" asked Oren Ko. The Drethys, though injured, had risen to his feet and approached them. "I think I already did," Valen muttered. Ohali reached out and wrapped one hand around the pommel. Nothing happened. Her arm muscle strained, but she could not remove the dagger. She used a second hand, braced one booted foot against the wall, and still could not remove the sword from the stone. "Let me try," suggested Aden. He repeated the same effort, tugging two-handed while pushing off from the wall with one foot. Again, the blade did not move. Valen awkwardly tried to help him by grabbing the rounded pommel in both hands and pulling with all his might. The dagger still didn't move. They couldn't even scrape a few millimeters out of the wall. Valen wanted to curse, but Aden released the dagger and began to laugh. Valen spun on him. "What the hell's is so funny?" The young man was bent over laughing, bracing hands on knees to keep standing. He managed to say, "It's hilarious, right? We come all this way, we go through all this crazy stuff, and now it's just stuck in a wall." He laughed again. To Valen's shock, Ohali's frustrated look softened, and she started to laugh as well. Maybe it was contagious, or maybe Valen was just tried, because he started to chuckle too. In a way, it was kind of funny. "Great. Just great," he said. "We're gonna have to bring more Jedi to pull this thing out." "We've got to send a new request to Ossus," Aden said, still laughing. "Only send Jedi with the safest dreams." Oren Ko was unmoved. "Serious and thoughtful," he said. "Perhaps we must use the Force to move it." Without waiting for the others, he extended a hand and attempted to pull the dagger free with his powers. Ohali settled herself and reached out as well, adding her strength. Aden joined in the combined effort as well. They joined in deep concentration, putting all their strength into the Force. Valen was reminded that telekinesis was not his strong suit. But he still had arms, so while the other Jedi strained with their minds to tear the sword from the stone, he went up to it, grabbed the pommel in both hands, braced one foot against the wall, and tried with all his physical might to pull the thing free. It was different this time. He felt the others with him in the Force. They lent him their aid. They worked as one, all four of them in perfect unison, 2 masters, 2 apprentices, all united at the end of the quest. He heard metal scrape stone and felt the pommel shift in his hands. Valen pulled harder, kicked harder, and with one final grind he was falling back, away from the wall, the leather-bound handle still in his hands, the weight of the ancient dagger falling with him. He didn't land. White light surrounded him, not an explosion but a surge, and welcomed him in his embrace. When the light faded, we were back in space, all of us. Aden and I were aboard my ship. Valen and Oren Ko were aboard theirs. They had the dagger with them. And Mortis. Ohali swallowed. Gone. Our sensors showed no sign of it or anything else. We were alone in deep space. According to my shipboard chrono, less than 15 standard minutes had passed since our departure. Mine put it at a little over 5, Valen added, but my ship went in 5 to 10 minutes after Ohali's went in. Before your students took it in. Rather impetuous of them, don't you think? It was, Grand Master, Ohali admitted. But without them, we might not have seen through Mortis's deception. We may have been stuck there the rest of our lives. Was it deception? Asked Ben Skywalker. Do you think someone, or something, was consciously trying to trick you? He leaned forward intently. So, too, did his father. Luke Skywalker was an old man now, nearing his 90th year. Humans usually didn't get much further than that. Despite his snow-white beard and withered face, there was a curious, hopeful light in the Grandmaster's eyes. Valen hesitated. Ohali knew that his experiences inside Mortis were still raw and difficult for him. They were difficult for her too, but she said, I don't believe there was anything conscious on Mortis. I think what we found was what we wanted to see. We're taught that the Force reflects what it finds in us, and on Mortis the Force was so powerful, but raw, that it ordered itself according to our desires even without us willing it. If there was a deception there, it was something we perpetrated on ourselves. No ghost, then? Ben asked, very serious. If anything remained of the father, the son, or the daughter, I think it was the wild currents of the Force we felt. It was like an invisible storm blowing around us at all times. What about Abeloth? Luke asked, and looked to Valen. The younger man stared at his hands. His right one still bore the pink flesh of healing burns. Valen said, if there was a real Abeloth there, I don't think she'd have been defeated so easily. Easily? Ben arched a red brow. You said you impaled her with the Mortis Dagger. I thought I did, Valen said. Assuming anything that happened there was even real. It was, Luke said firmly. You have proof of it? He reached an age-gnarled hand to touch the meter-long wooden case in front of him. The dagger had been placed inside his locked frame. All 4 Jedi looked at the sealed case with reverent contemplation. Valen said, it's funny. After all we went through, all it represents, it doesn't feel like anything to me. In the Force, I mean. It does to me, Ohali said. It felt like completion, the end of her quest. She had no idea what she'd do with her life now. She'd accomplished a goal she'd never expected to, and still had decades to spend as she'd like. She'd continued to train Aden, of course. They'd wander the galaxy for a while, perhaps guided by the young man's wayfinding skills. Funny, she was the master, but she owed her apprentice more than she could ever repay. She knew the same was true for Valen. "I feel something in the dagger," Ben said softly. "I was at Abeloth's mercy once. I felt trapped in this invincible grip. Like all the force power I could ever have would be useless. It was the most helpless I'd felt in my life then, the most helpless I'd feel for a long, long time." He went quiet, and Ohali knew Ben was thinking of his wife, lost in the disaster at Hapes, and his daughter Jade, now sadly withdrawn from the Force. She only saw the heir to the Jedi Order rarely, and her memory preserved an image of him as she'd first met him, young and strong. A quarter-century had taken its toll on them all, and Ben more than most. His face was beset with frown lines, and his russet beard was going gray. But he took a deep breath and said, "This dagger is truly special. It's a blade that cuts everything. It severs the fundamental bonds of the Force itself. If there's any weapon that can bring down Abeloth, it's this one." They watched the case in silence again. Valen muttered, "It's a good insurance policy anyway. Hopefully we won't have to use it for a really long time," Ben said. "However," Ohali added. "Abeloth will come back," Luke said. "Not today. Maybe not for a generation or 20, but she'll be back." They were grave words, but there was a light in his eyes. Luke folded his withered hands in his lap and looked at his son, then Valen, then Ohali. "I feel the dagger in the Force. It's overpowering." Warily, Ohali asked, "What does it feel like to you, Grand Master?" "Our future," the old man smiled, like it was the most precious thing of all. There were always places in the temple where Jedi could be alone. Solitary contemplation was, after all, encouraged for everyone in the Order. These lonely places could be blank wall cells, personal quarters, private gardens, or exterior balconies overlooking the arid hills of Ossus. Orenco's favorite was one of the small gardens. The air here was kept warm and humid. The plants were lush and flowered every conceivable color. It was very different from the landscape outside, or from his homeworld. Perhaps that was why he liked it. He went there to calm his thoughts after meeting Ben and Luke Skywalker. He'd seen the luminary masters from a distance but never spoken with them until he, Ohali, Master Horn, and Aden Tohri sat down to discuss Mortis and the dagger. Father and son had emanated weary wisdom and battered faith that made the century-old Drethus feel young as he rarely did. Orenco needed to process all that. He preferred to be here alone, but this time Aden Tohri followed him. Their master had remained behind to speak further with the Skywalkers, but the two apprentices had been dismissed, so it made sense they'd linger together. However, neither of them spoke until they climbed the stairs and trekked down hallways to reach the garden. Orenco knew the young human was itching to speak, but for some reason Tohri held his words in. Finally, as they stood beside a shallow pond shifting with the submerged colors of bright-scaled fish, Orenco said, "Have you met the Skywalkers before?" "Of course not," Aden said, almost laughed. The human crossed arms and stared into the water. "I never thought I would. They knew my name, knew all about me. I wasn't expecting that." They'd known all about Orenco too, but then, his situation was unique. He crouched beside the pond, wincing slightly for the pain in his healing ribs. "It seems we've had our brush with greatness. I am satisfied." A brush. Aden actually did laugh that time. If what we did wasn't greatness, I don't know what counts. Orenco sensed pride from the human, but also unexpected regret. He asked, "Is greatness something you desire?" "I know I probably shouldn't, but sure. Of course I do. Who doesn't?" Orenco considered his reflection. He never longed to battle Sith legions or bring down empires. Violence was distasteful to him, and so was drama, but he did want to be respected. He wanted to be living history and venerated long after the Skywalkers, Aden, Ohali, and Valen's children's children were gone. That was the fate he'd been born to. It was also the fate his desires had manifested on Mortis. Of course, Aden said, this isn't exactly going to make us famous. Grandmaster Skywalker had explained that the acquisition of the Mortis Dagger would be kept secret. If Abeloth did someday return, and she captured the mind of a Jedi as she'd done before, she might learn about their possession of the dagger, and they lose their greatest advantage. So for now, their strange actions and stranger heroism would go unheralded. Oren Ko asked, "Does this bother you?" "I didn't join the Jedi to get praised," Aden said, in a tone that said he wouldn't mind it either. He sighed, "I'm more worried about something else. Don't you think we must have, well, peeked?" Oren Ko blinked. "Peeked? Of course." Aden spread his arms. "We found something they've been chasing since before I was born. We were the first Jedi on Mortis in almost a century, and we might have bought the future for the Order for centuries more. If that's not greatness, I don't know what is. And we're still both Padawans." He grinned, but then the smile wilted. "What can we ever do to top that?" "I do not know," Oren Ko admitted. He'd never considered it like that. "I thought it must be worse for you. I've got, say, 80 years left at most. You've got over 800. That's a long time to rest on your laurels." Oren Ko stood. Again, his ribs ached. "I don't intend to rest." "Neither do I, but I don't know what I'll do next. Neither does Master Soroc. The Quest Knights are getting dissolved." Quietly, Aden tilted his head and looked at the leaves and flowers canopied above. "Maybe I'll go back to Bastion. It's just that after all we went through, everything else is going to feel so small." He was probably right. That hadn't bothered Oren Ko before, but it did now. Aden said, "Maybe, decades from now, we'll knock into each other again. I'll be all gray and senile. You'll look exactly the same, but we'll still sit down like a pair of old guys and talk about the good old days. I hope we will have better things to do than that." Oren Ko looked into the pool again, at their faint reflections laid upon ever-shifting color. "Today we are apprentices. One day we will be teachers who learn as much from their students as they teach. Hopefully. That feels a long way off." Aden looked into the water. His pensive expression shifted to a sly white grin. "Do you think we'll have to get bailed out by our students?" "Only if the Force requires it," Oren Ko said, but a part of him hoped it did. After all, if the student could save the teacher, then the teacher must have done something right. The Mortis Dagger was one gift to posterity, but he could still give others, even if they weren't so grandiose. Time, like the Force, could be a generous thing.